And we're consecrated to the unity of the church, to maintain the unity of the church and the order of the church. And I want to get back to what it means to be people who lead people to Christ.
Hello again, everybody. My name is Todd Rossnagel, and I am the Director of Communications for the Louisiana Conference of the United Methodist Church. And welcome to the Louisiana NOW podcast. We are extremely happy to launch this as we hope to share stories of hope and stories of importance for Methodists in our state as they continue to excel in ministry and make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. We will interview the bishop, members of the conference staff, lay leaders, and pastors. And, well, if you have an idea for a podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us an email, podcast@la-umc.org. And you can find that email and more on our webpage, la-umc.org/podcast. And as I mentioned, in today's episode, we hear from Bishop Cynthia Fierro Harvey. We talk about a lot of things. We talk about the Mediation Protocol that is getting a lot of attention right now. We also talk about annual conference. We talk about the fact that this could be her last annual conference in Louisiana. And we even talk about, of all things, the LSU quarterback, Joe Burrow. It's a great interview, and it's our first here on the Louisiana NOW podcast. Without further ado, Bishop Cynthia Fierro Harvey. Bishop Harvey, thank you for joining us on our first podcast for the Louisiana NOW.
Finally, we've been talking about this for so long.
I think it's going to be great, a great medium to share news inside the conference. I think we have to start with news from the larger denomination, and that is the Protocol of Reconciliation and Grace Through Separation. A long name, a long time coming. You were with this group, invited into this mediation. Tell the folks at home just like a 30,000-foot view of what this is for the church.
30,000 foot, I don't know if I can, I might have to get in the weeds at times,
that's fine.
If that's okay. This is a long time coming. This is after a long and arduous process and a place where we've reached impasse as a United Methodist Church and over the issue of LGBTQ persons and their ministry and their ability to be married in the United Methodist Church. So it was really after the February General Conference that the decision by some folks was we can't live like this anymore. We've tried, and this impasse is just too great. So it was at the impetus of a courageous bishop, Bishop Yambasu of Sierra Leone, that we began conversations, or he began conversations with people of very diverse theological positions. And later this group decided to continue the conversation. The group got smaller, and representation from all of the varying, the right, the left, and everyone in between gathered. And so this protocol really came as I would say, a labor of love, literally love for one another and love for the church, and a desire to stop the harm. So it's available online everywhere, and people are talking about it, but I'm really urging people to read it for yourself. I'm going to try to interpret it for you, but even then, you still need to read it for yourself.
Sure, and just for our audience to know, we're going to have the links available on the show notes of the page.
So it basically, what it does, it allows for persons who wish to be in a more traditional Methodist movement, if you will, to establish a traditionalist Methodist expression. And the United Methodist Church would remain if this agreement, which is now being turned into legislation. And by the way, that legislation has to then be voted upon the delegates at the General Conference in 2020, just a few months from now in Minneapolis. So this work is not a done deal. Some people are thinking it still has. This is really at the service of the delegates. So it does allow for separation. The word separation is very important. Nobody's leaving. Nobody was asked to leave. This is a mutual agreement to separate. If people wish to separate from the United Methodist Church and join the more traditional Methodist expression, they have the ability to do that. If people want to remain in what we're calling the post-separation United Methodist Church, they can do that. The post-separation United Methodist Church would then enter into some discernment of adapting the current Book of Discipline that would then eliminate the incompatibility language that was added back in 1972. It would also take out the traditional plan legislation that was included in the Book of Discipline after the February conference, and then probably streamline some other things within the discipline. It's an opportunity to, in some ways, to push a little bit of a restart, because the discipline has been pieces and parts and parceled for so long. It's time for us to take a really good look. The traditionalist expression of Methodism would then establish itself. Likely there is a group that has already begun to work on their form of what a Book of Discipline would look like for them. There's some things that would be very similar that would be in both, but then there would also be probably the point of separation has to do with inclusion, full inclusion of LGBTQ persons.
What is the next step for churches as they're listening to this, or maybe even for pastors as they're listening to this?
Personally, I have my own thoughts about what I would want to see a church or a clergy person or an annual conference to consider. Right now, the thing that I would most ask people to do is to think and pray about where they might be in this conversation. If you are a United Methodist Church now, and you wish to remain a United Methodist Church in the post-separation United Methodist Church, you would do nothing. You wouldn't have to vote. Same holds for an annual conference. If an annual conference chooses to remain United Methodist, it would do nothing. If, in fact, a local church would want to separate or an annual conference wishes to separate, there are provisions for that to occur. And a local congregation can choose to separate, and they would have to take a vote. An annual conference can wish to separate, and they would have to take a vote. The processes for that are just a little bit different for each, and it is a little complicated and complex, and I don't want to take the time again. It's in the agreement, explained further in a frequently asked question document that, by the way, will be dynamic. As questions come up, the FAQs being adapted almost as we speak on a daily basis. So there are provisions for people to separate from the United Methodist Church if they choose to be in a traditional movement that does not allow for the ordination or of LGBTQ persons, or that if they choose not to marry LGBTQ or same-gender couples.
You have a lot on your plate. So not only being involved in the mediation, but you are also the incoming president of the Council of Bishops. So this is a little late in coming, but congratulations. I know I've talked to you since then.
I think.
And that's what I wanted to get to. I know I've heard you say in times of craziness, well, I signed up for this.
Yeah.
I'm curious not only what the president of the Council of Bishops, what that role is and what it may mean for you and for Louisiana, but also what do you love most about being a bishop of the United Methodist Church?
I think I'll just start with what I love most is the possibility that we might actually impact and lead others to be able to lead others to a life in Christ. And that the unfortunate part about being a bishop is sometimes you kind of get stuck doing things that don't do that impede you from that. And my hope is actually that as we move forward through this separation, that we can return to that important work. And because that is what gives me, that's what I signed up for. That's what I signed up for. And we're consecrated to the unity of the church, to maintain the unity of the church and the order of the church. And I want to get back to what it means to be people who lead people to Christ. And sometimes unity is just takes a different form. And this separation, by the way, might be one of the best forms of unity, of ways for us to keep people together in the movement that we call Methodism. Not United Methodism, not traditional Methodism, but Wesleyan Methodism. So going back to your question of
what is the president of the Council of Bishops?
What happens? The president of the council is really, there is no quote-unquote pope for the United Methodist Church, so there is nobody in charge of all the United Methodist Church. That's just not our polity.
And that's by design, and some would say a very good thing.
Yes, some would say a very good thing. But the Council of Bishops designates, and then we actually elect one another to these roles. And my role will be to represent the United Methodist Church in all of its work around the world. We are, by the way, most people don't realize that we are a global church. That's actually what makes this thing even messier sometimes, right?
And beautiful.
And beautiful. But we are a global church. So I'm honored and privileged that my colleagues would entrust that to me. You conduct Council of Bishops meetings, you preside and all of those things. But mainly you're the face of the United Methodist Church and the voice of the United Methodist Church, although I cannot speak for the United Methodist Church. Only the General Conference can speak for the United Methodist Church. I am entrusted to do some of that as far as interpreting to the world what the United Methodist Church is doing. I think that's probably the better description of what a president of the council does, is interpret for the church and for the world what Methodists are doing around the world.
2020, as you know, is going to be a very busy year. Mm-hmm. We have General Conference in May, we have Annual Conference in June, and Jurisdictional Conference in July, and the rest of everything that goes with a regular calendar year. But I wanted to briefly talk about Annual Conference for those in Louisiana in June. This is the end of a 3-year brand that we have been living under. And so it's making disciples for the transformation of the world. And then the sub-theme is day after day after day, which is from Matthew 28, verses 16 through 20. And this is the 50th annual conference, the 50th session of the annual conference in Louisiana. What are your thoughts going in as we gather together in June?
Well, let me just backtrack.
It's early.
Yeah, no, it's not. That's tomorrow.
It's right around the corner.
Let me just go back a little bit. And when we chose this three-tiered theme, it was in anticipation of us being kind of in the place that we are. So
let me just help the audience. So it began with together.
Together.
And then last year it was in love. And then this year it'll be day after day.
Thank you. That no matter what, that God is with us. Day after day after day. So nothing separates us from the love of God, right? And so for me, this thematic, especially in this third year, this 50th year, at the end of a quadrennium, that no matter what, no matter how broken we are, no matter what, that God is with us day after day after day. And we can't do anything about that. We cannot do anything about that. So I think it's in some ways, some might say that this was serendipitous. I would like to say it was somewhat strategic. And I would certainly say that God has been in this for it to work as it has. And, to be at the end of the quadrennium and to be at this place and be ready to go into General Conference and Jurisdictional Conference and all the change that might be ahead of us, I'm not sure that I could have conceived of a better message and a better theme than day after day after day.
We'll be right back. The Louisiana Now podcast is brought to us by our good friends at the United Methodist Foundation of Louisiana. Since 1975, the foundation has been a resource where faith and money come together. One of the ways they do that is to promote planned giving. That is, encouraging us to make legacy gifts through our estate planning for the future of our faith. Planned gifts can make sure that ministry continues forever, and stats actually show that planned giving increases regular giving. Legacy donors not only continue their annual giving, but actually increase their annual gifts by an average of 75% after making a planned gift. The foundation here in Louisiana knows that starting a planned giving program in your church can be a challenge. Church leaders often ask, where do we begin? Well, the foundation offers the Planned Giving Navigator program, and it provides personalized guidance from experts to provide the tools and services your church will need. You'll be in a better position to create a calendar with recommendation, action items, and even educational segments. With Planned Giving Navigator, you'll be able to create everything from personalized brochures to customized videos with donor stories. And here's the best part. They're going to pick up the tab. Contact the foundation today. You can visit their website at umf.org for more information. Welcome back, everyone, to the Louisiana Now podcast. Bishop Cynthia Fierro Harvey is our guest. Bishop Harvey, in our last question, you mentioned the end of a quadrennium. Mm-hmm. And for the audience at home, bishops have the potentiality of moving after quadrenniums. Have you thought at all about the possibility that this could be your last annual conference with Louisiana?
Obviously. And just as pastors every year have to move, or no, don't have to move, but may move. That's just a thing that could happen every year. Nobody's guaranteed past a year at a time. We're not guaranteed past 4 years at a time in a particular place. Now, a little bit of a education here. So bishops are assigned 4 years at a time, and you can serve in one area up to 12 years. But every 4 years, there is an episcopacy committee for the jurisdiction that decides whether a bishop returns to that annual conference or moves.
Right.
So in 2016, I went into 2016 thinking the same thing, that they could move me this year. I go into 2020, they could move me this year. I don't get to decide that. Just as pastors, sometimes,
even as the president of the Council of Bishops.
Even as the president of the Council of Bishops, I do not get to decide that. Somebody else gets to decide that. And I remind pastors all the time that we're itinerant as well, and that we don't know. My assignment will come the middle of July, at the end of the jurisdictional conference. That's when my assignment would be made. So I will find out sometime in mid-July, and I have to report either back to Louisiana, because I can serve here another 4 years, mm-hmm. or someplace else on September the 1st. So I have little time to finish up. So obviously you're thinking, oh my gosh, do I need to clean my desk before I leave for jurisdictional conference? But that is the anxiety in our system, and it's also the beauty of our system. I always hear a lot from some of our retired pastors, and pastors have been around a long time, that pastors a long time ago didn't find out where they were going until they came to annual conference. So I hear stories of pastors bringing their U-Hauls to annual conference because they didn't know whether they would get a different assignment on that day. So
I even remember hearing a story where they would have a map of Louisiana in the back of the room, and you would go to that map to figure out where your next town or city that right. you would be living in.
It's because some places it's like, where is that? I think I know where most of these places are, but it's really, at some point you just have to be at peace with it and understand that is just how it works. But I went into 16 thinking this could be my last annual conference. I'll go into the 2020 annual conference with some of those same feelings, and so it doesn't change anything that we do.
Right.
But it does, in fact, probably raises for me the need to make sure that we're doing what we need to do to prepare the way for possibly another bishop in the future.
Well, we'll cross that bridge when we, if and when we get to it.
And we've got lots of bridges in Louisiana.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We also have another thing in Louisiana that I wanted to talk to you about, and that's a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback.
Burrow keeps it, dives into the end zone. A touchdown run for the gunslinger, Joe Burrow.
I want to ask you of all things about Joe Burrow.
Joe Burrow.
The reason why, first of all, everyone loves Joe Burrow.
How do you spell Burrow again?
Well, there's two different ways.
Okay, just want to make sure.
There's the Cajun way, and then there's his preferred way. But I have been fascinated with Joe Burrow, obviously from an athletic standpoint. But I also kind of think this story is kind of biblical, so I wanted to unpack this with you. Here's a guy who was kind of discarded from this elite program and then finds refuge down here in Louisiana. And then surrounded by the right tools, he's able to flourish. I might be stretching it there to say it's biblical, but what do you see with the story of Joe Burrow that has obviously captivated our state?
Yeah, I think of this also as a story of grace. And what I loved about watching and I'm a big sports fan, so just we'll go.
We
with
won't
that.
mention the Longhorns.
Well, I will. Maybe not this year, but so what I loved is there's Jalen Hurts and there's Joe Burrow. Both have a similar story. And all I could think of this is a story of grace. This is the story of second chances. And certainly Joe Burrow's speech, he did that. I thought that one of the classiest things the guy did was go to the Ohio State coach before he went up on stage to accept the trophy. That's just a class act kind of guy.
It's a story of redemption.
It's a story of redemption. It's a story of grace. It's a story of second chances. It is the biblical story. It is the biblical story. If you from beginning to end, we know of, second chances where God redeems God's people. Day after day after day, you cannot escape the love of God, and nothing will separate you from it. And so I don't think it's too much of a stretch. I think there's a lot of biblical metaphors in sports today, but that's why I especially like to watch when I was watching the Oklahoma LSU game. Even though being a Longhorn, watching Oklahoma, that's always really tough. But here are two quarterbacks, two Heisman Trophy candidates. One's the winner, one comes in second, right, in the voting. And both are young men of second chances. Young men who know firsthand what it means to be people of grace, people of redemption. Boy, that doesn't get much more biblical than that. So, I'm sort of a fangirl of Joe Burrow here. If he had a fan club, I would enjoy it. I was actually at graduation, LSU graduation. My daughter's sister-in-law graduated from LSU, and Joe Burrow, they kind of squeezed him in the back of the PMAC. He walked across, got his degree, and they squeezed him out the other side. Obviously, he didn't march in with but it was like, people stood up and they cheered, and, it was really cool to experience that. And I think Louisiana needs those sorts of moments.
Absolutely.
When we can claim that we're winners.
One more couple quick fun questions. We're going to try to do this from time to time on the Louisiana Now podcast. Just random questions. What makes you laugh most? People always say you have a great sense of humor.
Well, you got to have a great sense of humor to do this for a living.
What makes you laugh the most?
I laugh at myself a lot.
Yourself?
I do. I can't take myself very seriously. There are times where it calls for me to be serious. I come from a family that laughed a lot, and mostly at ourselves and at one another out of great love for each other. So I laugh at myself. I laugh a lot, and I like to have a good time. That's just also part of who I am and how I grew up, that there is always something to celebrate. So I laugh at myself mostly.
All right, this next question, you have been literally around the world many times through your role with UMCOR. What is the one food you could never bring yourself to eat?
I've eaten weird food, and my favorite
even here in Louisiana.
One of my favorite experiences, and this is not the answer to your question, but I was somewhere in Africa, and we were having this kind of a stew, and I took the lid off the pot, and there was a little head of something in the stew. I carefully put the lid back on the stew, and I'm sure it was delicious. And I apologize for anybody listening to this that was there with me, because I also know these are sacrifices people make to prepare these meals for you. So, I didn't want to just push food around on my plate, which I have also been known to do. But the thing I will never, ever, ever, ever eat, and I know they say never, but I will never eat. It's called balut. I think it's spelled B-A-L-U-T or something like that.
Balut. That sounds like a fancy cake or dessert.
Oh God, no. What it is it's an egg,
Okay, I like eggs.
Eggs with an embryo still of a chicken or a duck, and you eat it, and it's still it's developing. It's an embryo, right? So little feathers and all of that. So it's mostly eaten. I experienced it in the Philippines, and I love my Filipino brothers and sisters.
Now you say you experienced it. Does that mean you ate it?
I tried to eat it, and I just couldn't.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it, and so I that's just one thing I don't think I will ever eat. And if you want to look it up, there's a photo of it, I'm sure, somewhere in Google, and you will never eat it yourself. And yeah. So.
Well, that's an odd way to end this podcast, but
well, we're in Louisiana. It's about food.
Yes,
so
yes,
okay.
yes. Baloo. Make sure to avoid that. Bishop Harvey, thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate it, and we look forward to a very busy 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. Will you ask me back?
Of course.
Okay.
Will you come back?
Absolutely. Thanks.
We thank Bishop Harvey for her time, and we look forward to future episodes with Bishop Harvey here on the Louisiana Now podcast. By the way, if you need more information on the protocol of reconciliation and grace through separation mediation plan, you can find that on our website. You can also find it on our show notes. Our website, by the way, la-umc.org. And that's also where we have our podcast hosted, is la-umc.org/podcast. And thank you so very much for listening to this first ever Louisiana Now podcast. We look forward to doing this in the future. If you have an idea for an episode, we'd love to hear from you. Our email is podcast@la-umc.org. In the meantime, we'd love for you to do a few things here with this podcast. Number one, we'd love for you to subscribe. That way you'll never miss when we launch a new episode. So subscribe on your favorite podcast channel. Secondly, we'd love for you to share this podcast with a friend, someone who may enjoy the Louisiana Now stories. And then finally, if you're so inclined to leave us a positive review, it really helps in the podcast world. So thanks again for joining us. We really do appreciate it. May the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Thanks again.